Today we're joined by a very special guest, Ralph Thomas. Ralph, how are you doing?
I'm the very best, and thank you very much for visiting today. We should have an exciting time.
I think we will. Ralph, the last time I think I saw you before COVID, before we get into who is Ralph Thomas, because that's what this episode's dedicated to today. When I received my communications degree, you were receiving a little degree yourself over at UNB. Talk about that.
Oh, well, that was that degree now. I think that goes back to
2018, if I'm not mistaken.
I have to look at it. Was it 2018? The Honorary Doctors of Letters degree, which I was honored indeed because, and you know, it's just that I don't specialize in anything special, but I guess my specialty is helping my community to the best of my ability. And really, that started back in a timeline of when I was taking part in amateur boxing. So let's get to the top part of who Ralph Thomas is. Ralph Thomas was born in the city of St. John. When I was 2 years old, I was taken to the country and I was brought up by my aunt and uncle. Now, they were Mr. and Mrs. Percy Marsh, and they were probably one of the best things that happened to me in life. And I learned that as I grew. So being in the country sort of give you an idea that why I'm talking about history and things like that, because it was an area that Black folks first came to these parts. And in Willow Grove, the 1800s was the time of refugees coming to these parts. And some of the folks that I was connected to, my mother was a Middleton and so on, and those things connected me to Loyalists when the Loyalists came to these parts. So 2 years old, going to Willow Grove, stayed there until I was probably 17 years old when I left there and got my first job in the Northwest Territories. But coming up in Willow Grove, it gives us a taste of, I'm connected with Black history, so it gives you a taste of Black folks living in Willow Grove back in I moved to Willow Grove when it was 1940, so it gives you an idea that Ralphie's about 84 years old right now, and that living in the country probably was one of the next blessings because it was hard work to live in the country. It was tough. You had to travel. I had to walk a mile to get to school, go to school, the little old country school there. And then you were surrounded. The biggest thing, I guess, is we were surrounded with all different types of people in that time, and I was lucky that way. I guess I was blessed because you know, the 40s and 50s was a good time for me to come up, because living in the country, you didn't experience some of the racism that my siblings, like my brother and my sister, experienced. In that there were certain places they couldn't go. They weren't allowed to go to this restaurant, or they weren't allowed to go to certain places. And then, you know, it was a time of people, Admiral Beatty, places like that. You had to go in the back door versus being allowed to go in the front door. Some of the restaurants was the same way. When I grew up in the country, everybody got along with each other. It was a sort of a neighborly place. If anybody got into trouble, i.e. when you were younger, you got into trouble, you did something wrong on the way home, or you were lally-gallying around the roadside, and somebody called or told your parents, and you were in for a rough time when you got home, eh? So the old days, they corrected you pretty quickly. You didn't have to wait for punishment for being bad. And that was good. It was strong. And it was also, what was good about the country is everything you did was a lot harder than somebody just saying, all right, get in the car, I'm going to drive you to school. And then at 4 o'clock, I'm going to pick you up from school. Be ready. We had to walk everywhere we went. We walked home. We walked to school. We walked home. And then when I got out of Willow Grove, went to Simon's High School, we had to go and get on the bus and go to East St. John, of course. Well, then I love sports, and I got involved with track and field, and I got involved with different things. And that meant you got a bus to school, but then you had to hitchhike home at night. So you're looking at 17 to 18 miles back then to go from where I lived in Taylor Lake Road to Simon's High School. So we would go and take part in different sports. That meant you hitchhike all the way home. Or, you know, when you hitchhike, you were lucky to get a drive, because the only people that's going to pick you up are the people that know you. And in those times, you would get the odd drive and take you right to Willow Grove. All you had to go right to Taylor Lake Road, and you had to walk a mile. So what? That was nothing. But if you just got a ride to Bellomond Corner, what we call, that was the break off where you went to St. Martin's or Barnesville, then you would have to walk all the way from that bridge just past the airport. So those were things that kept you physically fit, eh? You were always walking, you were always in good shape that way. Even if it was storming or raining or cold, whatever, it got us used to life was not easy. And then when you got home, you had to do the chores. I grew up on a bit of a farm, so we had hens and chickens and turkeys and all the good things that kept you fed, I guess. We had, you know, all those things. We had horse and wagons that we could haul the wood out of the woods after my uncle cut it down, in which I was old enough to go and help and bring it out. That was part of the story. That was part of growing up. And I really never appreciated that, I guess, until I got older, because what it taught me growing up in the country, it taught me a couple of things. It taught me that if I wanted anything extra, whether it was a used bicycle or whether it was a new bicycle, you had to find a way to earn extra money to get it, right? As a student going to school or whatever, you would have to find ways. So in the country, you work for the farmer down the road, or you work for somebody else, or you help do something for the next door neighbor, and they would give you money. And then you had a newspaper route, and you got friendly with the dogs really quick because some of them would chase you, and that was a part of the experience of delivering a paper to the Quinlan family or the Thompson family that lived on that road. So that was some of your excitement back then, being involved with your neighbors. Your neighbors were always friendly. I've never experienced the racism that my sister and my brother would have experienced in the city.
How so, Ralph?
Well, it was, I guess it was well established that the country folks got along most of the time. I can't remember anybody fighting with each other, or don't go there. Well, the seniors used to say don't go there because they don't want you there, but really, I'd go anyway. And got my friends, the Leslies were next door. They were black folks as well, and the Roaches and all of them, and we all was great. The Quinlans was in between that and the Thompsons. It was a time that we never had a whole lot of racial discrimination headaches going on in that part of the world. If somebody said something off key or just off color about a French person or a black person or whoever, if he was not one of us, and it was found out about by whichever person in the community, you were in for a ear lashing and a tongue lashing, whatever, and that was over. It was as quick as that. I will not tolerate this kind of thing. Was taught to you, and that's what I all picked up. And Yeah, did we get in fights? Sure, we got in fights. We got in fights because mostly you wanted to take something away from somebody and really it wasn't yours. So you're going to get a slap on the head and then away we go. And then the best guy would say, okay, that's it. And the next day we'd say, hi, Fred, how you doing? It wasn't a big war and somebody angry at each other forever. So that is growing up in the country. You grew up in the country. Number one, you didn't have it easy. But when I got into the part of learning about our history and Willow Grove being in the 1800s timelines, you realize that we thought we had it tough. So when I get into the side where we talk about Black history or growing up Black in the city of St. John or the province of New Brunswick, I'll bring up how it was for loyalists and refugees in that timeline. But right now, we're just talking about Ralphie. What did he do? Well, the big thing that I did, and I was happy that I had the opportunity, was to learn the fundamentals of boxing. I joined boxing first because I wanted to, if we get into a fight or we got into a wrestling match or any of these things, I also wanted to learn how to defend myself if we were boxing or if we were fighting with each other, right? And that's why I went to a boxing club. I went to a boxing club, learned the fundamentals of boxing. I also realized that because I lived in the country and I took up boxing, I had to travel, right? You travel back and forth, you had to hitchhike home and all these things. So it was a good time for me to be involved in a sport that I liked. I liked track and field, yes, but as I grew older, I got, out of track and field and got into something more solid. And I figured boxing would be it. And that's what I did. And it helped me in the fact that I was busy all the time, right? So I boxed 3 nights out of the week. The other nights I had to be home carrying wood or doing something for the household, right? So boxing was good. And I always said, because of boxing, and somebody took their time out to teach me the fundamentals of self-defense that way, I would do the same thing when I got old enough. So along the way, we get older and we do things. And then when I got to be about 16 years old, it was about 17, I got a job in Gagetown, clearing Gagetown, and they were just clearing things then for the army sites, and they were doing things. So I worked with somebody in the woods because I had worked in the woods with my uncle, and I had worked in the woods with my birth father and all those things. So I was ready to take on some heavy duty work. So I went to Gagetown. While I was in Gagetown working, now I'm 17, and there was people there. I boarded in the Gagetown area, or Muckto, and there were these people who worked up north in the Northwest Territories or whatever. And saying, gee, what's that all about? And this guy came home. He was sick, and he was living in the same boarding house. So he said, "Why don't you come back with me up to the Northwest Territories? You'll make some more money. You'll be better off going there." And I said, "Well, why not?" And you imagine I'm this quiet guy who hardly said boo most of the time, because that's the way we were brought up. We were brought up to be seen but not heard. So I was shy and bashful. But anyway, I realized it's time for me to get out and work and help with the household. So we made a decision, and the parents that I was brought up, Mr. Marsh and Aunt Lottie, we said, okay, go. So I went to Montreal, first time going to Montreal. And on the Thomas side of the family, there were people in Montreal that I could go and stay with, my aunt, stuff like that. So went there, and we was looking for, let me get back to the place where these people said, come on and go up the Northwest Territories with us. So this is the steps I had to take to get there. I had to go to Quebec and go to Montjoli, and then we had to get ready to go to Frobisher Bay, and then we flew to Baffin Island. So that's about 800 miles inside the Arctic Circle. And when I got there, now you imagine, I'm 17 years old and it's cold, but I didn't realize how cold it was until the next day. I had to go up to the upper site of the dew line. The dew line, for those who don't know what that is, the dew line was the distant early warning line. It was an area where the radar was put up to, so we could defend ourselves against, I think, what it would be Russia, that we'd have to know if they were going to come and attack us. And the dew line was an item that was built, or a project that was built by the Americans. So the Canadian company by the name of Preeny and Brace, or the company I worked for, to help build that dew line, build the roads, build a foundation to put this big circle on, and it would go round and round when you got ready.
That's what I was picturing. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah. So they did that for when the big thing that opened my eyes was the fact that when I got up the next morning and had to go up to the upper site, and it was 65 below zero with just a little touch of wind. And normally, if it was storming or if it was really windy, you weren't allowed out, see, up in the Northwest Territories. And I had to go to work on a rock crusher. For those who don't know what a rock crusher is, it's a great big machine. You dump a load of rocks in, and it shakes the rocks up. And then it goes down between these big rollers that crush it down to little wee quarter minus, is what they call it when they put it on your driveway. And that was my job. But on that crusher, there were 4 or 5 different spots. And due to the fact that it was so cold, and you're lifting rocks and you're doing this, I had to make a decision and say, do I want to be a laborer for the rest of my life? And it was right then and there, I said, okay, I'm going to look at what's here, and I'm going to try and make the best of it, because I don't want to work in the cold. So for that it was the shed that you pulled the lever and the crusher start working. And that was the long shot of Ralphie. I learned the 4 or 5 spots that was on the crusher. I stayed there for about 8 months, and then I came home for a visit, get out of there, take a break. When I went back a month later, all the people that I worked with didn't know anything about a rock crusher, and I got my first break. The guy that was there said, you worked on this before, so you can be the night shift foreman. So at 17, 18, I was as big as I am now, because I grew in a hurry, it seemed. And he put me to work, and that's how I grew from there. But from there, you learn some things about race right off the bat. I remember it well when I was coming down from the upper part of the place and going to the mess hall for our foods, and then we would go and live in these huts over the nighttime, and that's all you did. You worked and you eat and you would sleep, and you get up and do it all over again. And there was a guy there that called me one time, and he said, Blackie. And I heard it, so I never paid any of mine. And then I heard this Blackie again, and I turned around to him and said, are you meaning me? And he said, yes. I said, well, look, here's how you and I are going to get along. Don't you ever call me that again. And I'll call you Mr. So-and-so, and you call me Ralph Thomas. That was the thing. So it's settled. I said, oh, well, I'm probably gone home in the morning. They'll send me out for talking back to the supervisor. He was the supervisor of the site. But truth be known, in the long run, he was the guy that gave me the job of night shift foreman on that rock crusher. So my time of being successful started by pushing rock down a grizzly, and a guy, an Englishman from England, giving me a break to be a foreman. So that's one step of Ralph moving forward in his life, whether it was working on a rock crusher, whether it was being back home just cutting lumber in Grand Bay or Westfield, wherever we had to go. And then you went from there to Gagetown, and then you went from there to the Northwest Territories. And then I came home. When I came home, I, of course, then got a job with, I think it was a place that was building Champlain Heights here in the city. And I was the carpenter's helper there for a while. And then when that get up, I went to work for Irving Oil. And I was a service station attendant for Irving Oil. And worked in the gas pumps down there on Market Square, Haymarket Square. You wouldn't remember that because you're too young for the remember those times. But at Haymarket Square, right where the bridge was a big Irving Oil service station. And I worked down there for a good 6 months. And I remember serving Mr. K.C. Irving, and didn't know who it was, and didn't matter. I ran in there. Those days, you ran to the pump, you washed the windshields, you washed the rear window, you asked for the oil to be, do you want me to check the oil, or do you want me to check the air in your tire? And you're gone back to the office, go get the money, give it to the customer, and you go to the next pump, because it was always busy. And this day, I forgot to thank Mr. Irving for his money. And half hour later, he calls up, and he called the guy that run the service station. And he said, you tell that young fella that served me, he did a wonderful job, but he forgot to thank me for my money. And that was an eye-opener for me then. I mean, even at, I think then I'd be 19 pretty well. And it was an eye-opener because, I was always taught to say thank you, and always taught to be a gentleman and the whole 9 yards. Did it all, but didn't thank him for his money. And I remembered that forever. But when you look at the long run of it, the Irving Company had always practiced what we call diversity today. Let people have a chance, let people have a break, give them a chance to work. When I worked there for 6 months, and within that 6-7 months period, I was offered the job to run the service station out in Thorn Avenue.
Thorn Avenue?
Thorn Avenue then, and there was International Harvester was on Thorn Avenue. It's now called Chandler Sales. And the other place was there, I guess the slaughterhouse for the animals was right across the street. Then there was a service station before you got to the slaughterhouse. And I worked there running the service station. Well, with that, man, I was the boss, and we had 5 or 6 people working there. And that was a time that there was a service station on every corner. So I got a chance, got the breaks, he put me out there, or they put me out there. And then I had the chance to work for a dealer, a guy that would lease the service station, and I could work for him. And one of the other growing ups in my part was caring about other people. Was I had 5 men that worked for me. And I was given the job with the leasee. And I said, what about the other folks? I have 5 people that work with me, and they all have families. I mean, where are they going to work? Where are you going to take them? Because I only need 2 or 3 people here. So the dealer is telling me. So they said, well, I'm sorry about that, but there's nothing we can do about that. They had said at that time. And the people that was the supervisors or the guy that would come around and give the orders of what you're going to do. So with that, I said, well, that's not good enough. So I went up to where Irving Oil had its head office then, and that was on Duke Street, or no, excuse me, Dock Street. And Dock Street was where Market Square is now. You know how you go into Market Square and you go into that shopping mall area? Well, the street went right up the same way you go up the street to the lights. And that was where Irving Oil's head office was, right in that corner. So I go up there with coveralls on, and I go up these big set of steps, and at the top of the step was Mr. K.C. Irving talking to a bunch of business people. And he broke away from them and came right over and said, "What can I do for you, young man?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Irving's like this. I get some people that nobody's trying to place them. So I need to know whether somebody can help us." So he took me in to the gentleman, and his name was Mr. K.B. Reed. I remember him well because he was a strong person. And I went in to see him, and he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I have this situation. I have worked in a service station down there for 2 years, and I have some people, and nobody's trying to place them. I'd like to have them looked after and helped." And Mr. Reed said, all right. We said, "I'll look into that. You get back to work now." They were very strict people, right? That was good. It was a good learning curve. And next day, bottom line was everybody found a place to work because there was a service station on every corner. Surely, to goodness, somebody could place these people so they could feed their family. And from there, I, of course, had dreams and had goals. And to get the dreams, I guess you had to go to school at night and learn. I wanted to be a mechanic. And I learned the fundamentals out of the a place that they taught mechanic and carpentry and all that. And it was called, I'm trying to think of the name now, what it was called. Oh, the community college, I guess they called it back then, eh? And it's still out there today, and people learn different trades from out there still. And I learned to be an automotive mechanic. So my first job was away from the service station that I worked on Thorn Avenue, and I went to work for the people in International Harvester. So that was a place that International Harvester was a place where they had trucks. That was the big trucks and the small trucks and the half tons and so on. And I kept going to school to learn the trade. And my dreams were, I wanted to be a mechanic. I wanted to work in a service station or something where I was the boss of the mechanics. And then I wanted to be the boss of that, whether it was a service station or whether it was a garage somewhere or whatever. And those goals came to me. And then I left there and I went to work for a car dealer, and I ran a service station department for a car dealer on Rossi Avenue. And at that time, I think it was when Mr. Briggs said, it was the dealership. Mr. Lawson had bought a place called D&J. And I went to work for them running the service station side of it then. And then the same person that got me that job a year later or two came to me and said, "Would you like to be a service manager?" So then D&J Motors had bought a Chev car dealership out on Rossi Avenue. So I went from Rossi Avenue right across where the Staples is now, and some of the other stores that are superstores out there and things like that. It's called, I think now, Steel Motors, something new deal.
Yeah.
And I worked there as a service manager, or I worked there as a service station person, and I worked out in Rossi Avenue now. There's another car, Aberdeen or something it's called now, and it was D&J Motors. I worked as service manager for some, I would say 3 or 4 years. And then I got tired of taking a whole lot of guff from people. It was a tough job and it was a hard job. So I decided to go into the business of owning my own service station. That wasn't a big move on my part. It was a loser, because by the time I took over a service station, the service stations was going the other way, eh? Every corner you see was starting to shut them down. So I invested and I worked for 4 years, and the only person that made money were the people that were working for me.
Wow.
So those were, a time that when you owned the service station, you had to marry it, because you went to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and you closed the doors at 11 o'clock at night. So it was a fun thing, and it was a mistake on my part, because I always worked in the garage, in the under the hood of a car, and you can't run a business being under the hood of the car all the time, and you miss the ways and means of how to manage an operation like that. So I decided that was it. Wasn't going to do that anymore, and I went to work for renovating houses after that. And I didn't really renovate houses, but I did do the air sealing business when it first came. It was called draft proofing. And then I went from there to just being a salesman for a renovation company called Atlantic Home Improvements. And that's where I stayed for some 30 years.
Wow.
Working there as a salesperson, and I loved that, and it was a good job, and it was, I got along with people well, of course, and it was some of the trying times then, but I never experienced, because I was Black, I couldn't make a living because I did well, and I didn't experience any of those things. So in the meantime, from the time of going to the Northwest Territories and then coming home and making a living and helping out with the household until you grew up long enough to get married and have 2 kids and all that, have 2 boys, 2 sons, Mike and Jeff. And that I did all that while telling you that story of starting out with my first big job with the Northwest Territories and all of that. And in the time that I was working as a service manager for D&J Motors, a place called Prude Incorporated asked me to come and join.
What year was this roughly, right, Ralph?
Prude Incorporated, I went to Prude Incorporated in 1980, and they were working on forming Prude Incorporated. And by 1981, Prude Incorporated became a registered nonprofit organization to help its community of Black people at that time, right? Because they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get this. There was certain things that wasn't working. So we formed that type of nonprofit organization for Black folks. But that only lasted so long because the leaders at that time had the forefront of being able to say, and I agreed with it then because I was part of the organization, that whoever comes through that door, we're going to help. Whether they're white, whether they're Black, whether they're of a different nationality, whether they're First Nations, whoever goes through the door. So that's what I feel where multiculturalism got its first start. Because whoever come through the door, we would help them. And we would help to find them a job, or we would help them find a place to live, or we would help them with whatever they were capable of doing. If they were doctors, of course, that's another thing, but at least we knew people that we could connect them with. And then the multicultural organizations started to grow better. And today, Prude is what, 40 some years old, 41 years old. Today, it is one of the major nonprofit organizations that's around. One of them, I say, because it helps the women, it helps the men, it helps people who are having a struggle. This helps people who are having a situation. Why am I here with the Black History Society? It was because of Prude. Being involved with Prude, you learned how your community, which was the Black community, as well as the white community, who was our neighbors and in most cases, in a lot of cases, our allies. Now, mind you, there will be other stories that's different than what I'm saying, because they experience racism and they experience the nastiness of discrimination and all this thing, and still experiencing it today. So we're here to hopefully, not hopefully, we will make a change. But every year it gets tougher to make that change. But every year I see, with my experience, and getting an education is one of the biggest things that you can ever do. So guess what? We're doing the things that we have to do for our people coming our way next time out. We have to get them educated in the field that just the one thing, got to have an education. University should be one of them, because I'm going to tell you, you're not going to get very far today and you only qualify to be a laborer, because there's not that much labor business available to you today. If you look around, it's just a fraction of how busy it used to be when I was 17 or 18. Maybe I'm telling you too much, am I? Is this a...
This is perfect. No, this is absolutely perfect. This is the foundations of who you are and exactly what we were looking for, and the folks here. So please continue. This is all very fascinating, Rob. Thank you.
Well, I'm just touching some of the stuff that we had to do, or the things that we had to do to make this a better community to live in. And I've touched base with that, and I think our time is where it should be. Is it?
We're coming up close. We have about 15 more minutes left, so that gives us time to now jump into. So we talked about the foundations, and we talked about how the community changed. Is the community now where you want it to be when you think about the organization that you lead and that you're a part of? Talk to me about that.
Well, is the community where we want it to be? I really have to say not yet, because we've got to go a bit farther in that, because you're different, you're going to have a bit of a struggle is still here. Because you're Black, that's going to be effective as well.
Still, Ralph?
Being affected, yes. So we're told by our people in the schools, so we're told by some of the newcomers that come here, so we're told by our First Nations, our brothers and sisters of First Nations. We're told that discrimination is still here. Name calling is starting to rise, is what I find lately. So we have to spend more time in the trenches. How do they cure in that? They're curing it by the school people, the people in the schools, especially those people, wonderful people called teachers, say. I don't know how they can be teachers today with all that's going on and the tough things that some of the adults is trying to throw their way to, it is very hard to be a teacher. God love them. But we can help. We have a whole lot of folks that come here that are new refugees, and now we have open arms to those refugees to help them get to where they want to be. They come here to these parts with things that we need for our community, to build our community, to build our province. So we've been blessed with that, but we've got to learn, we've got to work harder to get along.
And talk to me about some ideas or some thoughts. So we recognize that this is happening, and we recognize that there still seems to be quite a gap. What kind of ideas or planning have folks had to be able to bridge the gap?
Well, one of the biggest things that we do and have been doing since Prude, since the Black History Society, we have to let people know that our history is all made up under one, trying to say umbrella or one roof. The history that we have in this city, how it succeeded from being treated like an alien in the 1400s, the 1500s, and the 1600s, and even in 1800s when we weren't allowed to do certain things. And we'll touch on that on my next stories. But we have to come together as good neighbors. We have to come together as allies towards each other. So it's happening. Our brothers and sisters that are First Nations are a great example. It's happening. I never knew the history of most of the First Nation people until it got serious about our own history. And we found that the First Nations helped us. Whoever came along, they helped us get started.
Right.
I'm going to be able to tell you some stories that will open the eyes of a lot of people that how First Nations helped us all.
Yeah.
And newcomers that come here. We look back, we were all refugees at one time.
Yep. Yeah.
And we remember those times that because you were this religion and that religion, you were not welcome. And we remember all those times that because you're Black, you should stay back and all that garbage. But we can fix it if we just say to one another, hey, let's get along. Let's see where we can help one another. And if it's the number one thing is getting an education, then that's what we should be doing. For those who can go to school, go to high school, go to university, be something that's special so you can help the rest of us.
Absolutely. And so, Ralph, tell me the stories about the First Nations, what you're referring to.
Well, the First Nations that I know about, and we're going to work together with the First Nations a lot better here at the New Brunswick Black History Society.
Okay.
So I've talked to some of the folks, and really, we all should be out there telling our stories together. But, one example is little do people realize that in 1783, the first group of people to sit down with Black people at the same table and try and make it work no matter what, it was the Quakers, right? The Quakers right down here in Beaver Harbor. They were the people who said, that's enough. Black folks are human just like the rest of us, and we're going to get along. There will be no slave masters in this community. And they stood by that. But little did people know that, I certainly didn't know about it. Here it is 200 plus years later, that in 1783 and 1784, it was the worst time that you could be in these parts for winter. You thought we had a bad freeze out here, last Friday or one of those days, Thursday or something like that. I remember the days when it was cold all the time in places like Willow Grove and Loch Lomond and all those St. Martins. You freeze to death for a long time. Right now, winter just 2 or 3 storms and it's over.
Right.
Back in the 1800s or the 1700s, especially 1783, in those places like Beaver Harbor, it was so hard to be able to survive the winter. You had to be taught how to survive those winters. And the First Nations were the people that taught you how to do that.
Right.
And they taught us how to live off the land, and they taught us how to fish in the streams, and they taught us, it was a time that Black folks weren't even allowed to fish in streams or own a business. But
Right.
thank God for the First Nations in the beginning. So
Right.
that's a little bit of, where we came from and who we work with. But some of the people that we work with, let us not forget the First Nations. We're going to work together with the First Nations and find out a little more about the history in the very near future. And we'll be able to talk about that maybe sooner than you think.
So talk me through like what some of the collaboration will look like. Will there be some strategic planning with that, Ralph? What will it look like?
And that's up to the leaders. I'm just the guy that wants to find the history, and let's talk about the history and say, how can we correct the bad stuff in the future? But the leaders and the senior people in my side of the community, and the chiefs in the other side of the communities, the elders in that side of the communities, they will make, and the governments who are in power, whether it be the provincial or the federal or the municipal, they will make decisions that will be better for us, is what I'm thinking. And I always love to say it's a we thing, not an individual's, not the First Nations, not the Black people, not the white people being segregated from us. It's us coming together because our destinies seem to be tied together. Common sense. But I don't know, it's not going to be easy. And we're going to have to work on it every day.
Absolutely. And Ralph, what are some things that the team, part of your organization, do in the community? What are a few things that you want folks to know that your team?
Well, our team here in the history side of things is just the regular common sense of things. Okay, what did Black folks do to improve the community? And what did they go through to get to that level? And they're a good example of people who had the strength and had the perseverance and had the willpower to make sure that their families that grew up didn't have to go through all the garbage that they had to go through in the beginning. Not being allowed to do so many things, not being allowed to do things because of the color of their skin. We're tired of doing things and fighting over because we're different. We're going to get into that bracket called discrimination and racism and bigotry and all the crazy stuff that doesn't make people happy. It just makes it so hard to even exist on this little planet that, if we don't sharpen up soon, it's going to be much harder.
Absolutely. And I think, well, we have about 9 minutes left. So the other thing I wanted to cover was some of the awards that you received for all of the recognition that you've done. So I know that, you're not used to talking about yourself. So I do appreciate that. You're a very, very humble man, Ralph. And we certainly appreciate everything that you do for the community. You know that. I've been a huge fan of yours for years. You know that. And all that you do. But talk me through some of the awards that you have and the significance of them. Because for you, it's just doing the right thing, right? But
yeah, just doing the right thing is my biggest reward. And then people say, thank you very much, by way of becoming involved in the sport and in being involved in the Sports Hall of Fame in the city of St. John, and Sports Hall of Fame in the province of New Brunswick, and Sports Hall of Fame at the at the Canadian level. I'm truly grateful for that because it takes commitment. It takes people who are concerned. In my sport, it was a sport that it was a good sport to build character and to build real people. And all sports can do that. And if people are given the opportunity to do it, I never got all these awards. I think there's something like 20, let me see, no, really, outstanding awards would be 6 in the sport of boxing. But the sport of boxing is a sport that the individual has to commit themselves to do things, right? And that is one of the good sports. You can train for boxing and you can do all this exercise and you can do the running that it takes, but you don't have to be a boxer to get in but it does give you the opportunity to get into the condition that you can take part in any other sport. And the reason why I wanted people to be involved with the sport of boxing and go into a gymnasium is this fact. I wanted to make sure if people had frustrations that they took it out on a heavy bag or a speed bag instead of each other.
Absolutely.
So when they learn how to defend themselves and they learn how to box, most of the time they never get into fights because they talk their way out of the fight side of it. And the physical fitness side of boxing, for example, now is just below. We have ladies that are world champions right here in the city of St. John. We have guys that went through all that level of the provincial championships, and the national championship, and then international competition. And, we've got ladies here that in the sport of boxing are world champions. So, that's the sport. All right. The other things are associations and being part of the association. The Golden Glove Amateur Boxing Club was 1. The New Brunswick Amateur Boxing Club was 2. Being treasurer at national level was another thing. And the progress of helping New Brunswick become recognized as a leader in the sport of boxing. And that's why, they made me ambassador at the Sports Hall of Fame type of thing. I had a chance to go around and talk to people and tell people it's not all about fighting. It's about education. And if you're physically fit, it's a lot easier for you to study. Those are things, but people said thank you. So I thank the associations. I thank the community groups, the special honors. Look, they're just, they started in 1976 with the Canadian Amateur Boxing Association and Leadership and Builders Awards, and then it went right up to Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee Medal. So I'm just so, pleased with how people said, thank you very much, Ralphie, for coming to bat for us or defending or working with us. So this would be a better beach, or this would be a better place for the train in, or this would be the competition I can take part in, and doesn't matter what province it is, you'll have a chance at the national level. So with that, I can send you a list of some of the stuff, the special honors, and the same with any of the rest here, but it's not really about me. It is still a we thing. I know I couldn't accomplish a lot of these things without having a team, whether it was a team of 3 or 2 or a team of 14 or 15 people. You still need a team to make a difference.
Absolutely. And we have about a little bit less than 3 minutes left. So speaking of team, how many folks work at your organization roughly, right?
Right here now, this is all brand new, but we talk about Prude Incorporated. Now, I look at Prude Incorporated and they've got 10 people on the Prude team that are people who are doers for their community and they make a difference. We also have probably, looking at the board of directors, they too are probably 10 to 15 strong, and 75% of them are hands-on people. So that is, that is a real wonderful team. I talk about Prude. There's other teams that's the same in the city that work together and make things happen. But do you realize to have a team of 14 or 15 people and at least 50% and more are hands-on? Because you get used to people, and some of the organizations that I've lived or worked with, and you have 14 or 15 people, but only 5% of them are the hard-working people that go through the sweat of making it happen.
Yeah,
and keeping it going.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's what it's all about. So it's all about the teamwork, and it's all about not me, but we. And I think that that's a great key message for everybody to take away from that, Ralph. And I know that your team is always looking for ways in the community to be able to help and strengthen it. And I think that having these kind of conversations are critical for folks to know. And I know that your team has been very busy going to the schools right now, giving educated talks and discussions and open dialect. So we do appreciate that. So we're joined here today with Ralph the Tiger Thomas. If anybody, for everybody out there, I know that you know a lot of people, but you're a well-known amateur professional boxer. I know that you've been inducted into several sports halls of fame. And the best part about everything and all of your awards and attributes is that you've spent, more than 33 years developing in sports, and the best part of your life helping our community and building on our community. And in specific, I want to draw today a huge thank you for talking about New Brunswick and the Black History Society, and talking about some of the boards that you've served on. And I want to give you a huge thanks to you, and I appreciate you coming in, Ralph, and we appreciate all that you do, and we look forward to future conversations and more of the community having